Hello, welcome to Math with Marty. Neil says I was talking a little too fast on the last show, and you know, I agree. So today I'm going to try and slow down a little so that you can follow the math a little bit better. You see, we had this problem last week to try and explain how much water is getting through the aqueduct, how much water is getting to the city of Winnipeg. And I had some figures that I got from the engineering department and the waterworks department, and I wanted to see if they all made sense. And here's the basic facts. We got a cross-sectional area in the aqueduct of about 3 square meters, corresponding to a diameter of about 2 meters of pipe. It's a big pipe. And we're putting enough water through there to supply 600,000 people. We're putting through 3 cubic meters per second, which, by the way, comes to, if you figure that there's 100,000 seconds a day, it comes to 300,000 cubic meters per day, which is 1/2 a cubic meter for every man, woman, and child in the city of Winnipeg. Half a cubic meter. We are using quite a lot of water. I used to have the misimpression, by the way, that a city like this, that the industrial consumption would far outweigh the residential, but they tell me it's not so, that the bulk of the consumption goes to residential. And in fact, kind of a frightening figure is that the industrial consumption is actually declining as in real terms. And this is bad because industrial use of water means you're using the water as an ingredient or as part of the process of manufacturing, whether it's, well, the packing houses closed down. They used to use a lot of water. We're using less water without the packing houses. There's a lot of industrial processes that use water, whether for cooling or what have you. And if that section of the demand is declining, it sort of raises the question of who's doing the work, or alternately, to put it, I mean, what justifies 600,000 people sitting on a patch of prairie if we're not making anything here, if we're only just consuming, not producing. Anyhow, that's not the topic of the show. We want to see if the dimensions of the pipe and the elevation of Shoal Lake with respect to Winnipeg justify the flow through the pipe. And if you took a water tower 300 feet high, which is the elevation of Shoal Lake compared to Winnipeg, and poked a little hole at the bottom of the water tower, the water would come gushing out of the hole at a speed of hundreds of feet per second. And yet, the stuff that comes gushing out the aqueduct, it's flowed through the aqueduct at only 1 meter per second. Average velocity, based on that throughput we looked at. And we want to explain the 1 meter per second. And it's something like this. If you drop a ball from, let's say I drop it from 16 feet, because I know the answer. If I drop it from 16 feet, when it hits the ground, it'll have a velocity of 32 feet per second. Incidentally, if I want to drop it from 1/4 the height, if I only drop it from 4 feet, the velocity when it hits the ground will be not 1/4, but 1/2. The velocity when it hits the ground from 4 feet will be 16 feet per second. Can I see that right? If it falls through 1 second, it takes 1 second to travel 16 feet. It only takes 1/2 a second to drop 4 feet. Mm-hmm. And it ends up with 1/2 the velocity. Well, 1/2 the velocity means 1/4 the energy, because energy is the square of the velocity. Kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared. Mm-hmm. So when you want to get something to travel slower, if you want to get it to travel twice as slow, you only drop it from 1/4 the height, not 1/2 the height. Now, let's go back again. I said if something travels 16 feet, which is like 5 meters. If we drop it from 5 meters, it hits the ground with about 10 meters per second. That's after 1 second of free fall. 10 meters per second. Incidentally, if we roll it down a ramp, and the ramp has a total height of 10 meters, and the ramp was frictionless, that when it got to the bottom of the ramp, it would also have a velocity of 10 meters per second. It's because because of energy being conserved. Now, you see the energy it has as in form of kinetic energy at the bottom of the ramp is the same whether it gained it going straight down or whether it gained it by rolling at an angle. And yet, if we make the ramp more and more shallow, we know that the ball is going to reach a certain speed and then just keep going at that speed, which we call the terminal velocity of the ball, and it's related to friction. Now, a river or water flowing through an aqueduct is very much the same. And we want to know what is the factor that tells us what's the terminal velocity of the ball. Now, let's go back to this ball that was traveling at 10 meters per second when it hit the ground from a height of 16 feet. And let's say it was rolling down a ramp, but it was only rolling at 1 foot per second. Excuse me, 1 meter per second. So, compared to that 16-foot drop when it would have had a velocity of 10 meters per second, we want to know how far it would have to drop so that it should only travel 1 meter per second. So a tenth the velocity. And once again, the answer is not what you think. It's not that you drop it a tenth of the distance. You drop it a hundredth of the distance. Because a tenth of the velocity means you got 1/100th of the energy. The formula for kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared. So we got to drop it from not 16 feet, not 1.6 feet, but 0.16 feet, which is like 1/6 of a foot, which is 2 inches. So the velocity of the water in the aqueduct, 1 meter per second, corresponds to water gushing out of a column only from 2 inches below the surface. That's called the velocity head, 2 inches. And what I told you last week, like I was really rushing right at the end of the show, I said that to know the terminal velocity of something in a long channel where it's flowing down and down, you gotta know that this empirical fact, which has no sort of deep physical implication, that we haven't really ever explained this in terms of the fundamental diffusion of momentum, which explains viscosity. I mean, viscosity is an explained phenomenon on a microscopic level, that it's the diffusion of momentum of the water particles between adjacent layers under laminar slip. But this is another thing. I mean, this is something, you get into these big channels, and beyond a certain velocity, the viscosity calculation that you want to do, you see, the viscosity calculation of flow in a channel leads to what they call your parabolic velocity profile. It leads to layers of water slipping over each other in a very well-defined way. But in these big channels, you get turbulent flow. And it turns out that most of the viscosity is confined very near the edges. But the degree to which it's confined is not really understood in terms of basic theory. But it is well documented in terms of some very, very important experiments done by Mr. R.J. Reynolds over 100 years ago. Same guy that invented aluminum foil. No. It's not the same guy that invented foil. It's a guy named Reynolds. He's known for the Reynolds number, and he was one of these British 19th century scientists. And he very carefully plotted out a lot of facts of the water flow, which I can summarize in one statement, that when you hit your turbulent flow range, which is, like I say, it's not explained in terms of microscopic properties of water, but it's been documented. The rule of thumb which I go by, and works for air, water, oil, any liquid, what have you, 40 pipe diameters corresponds to 1 velocity head. And we already figured out that the velocity head, which is the pressure or the column of water associated with the velocity in the aqueduct, is 2 inches. 1 meter per second corresponds to 2-inch pressure of water. And we want to see if that corresponds to 40 pipe diameters. So let's just go to the board and do it. And God help us all if this calculation doesn't come out right, because I haven't done it before. We'll see what happens. Okay, the pipe diameter is 2 meters. So if we multiply that by 40, we get a vertical length of 80 meters. And what we're saying is that after 80 meters, the flow has reached its terminal velocity of 1 meter per second. And that in that distance, we hope that the vertical drop corresponds to 2 inches. 2 inches. 2 inches. Well, let's multiply it by 6. 80 meters times 6. And we'll start with 2 inches. First we'll make it times 6 to get 500 meters. That's half a kilometer. And that gives us 1 foot of drop. Oh man, it's going to come out perfectly. Look, half a kilometer. Now we'll multiply it by 2 and we'll get 1 kilometer. And we multiply this one by 2, we get 2 feet. So what I'm hoping is that for every kilometer between here and Shoal Lake, we drop 2 feet. And that's what it is. It's what, 100 miles? So give it 150 kilometers. And so 150 kilometers at 2 foot per kilometer, it's a drop of 300 feet. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And the thing that's interesting to notice is that how much water our City of Winnipeg consumption corresponds to in relation to rainfall. And we had a calculation a few weeks ago, we did. We had a calculation a few weeks ago where I took sort of the Winnipeg River system and estimated that it was 50,000 square miles. And said that it has a total rainfall corresponding, estimating it based on the rainfall in the City of Winnipeg, which is 20 inches a year. And it turns out they get a little more out that ways. But anyways, based on the rainfall in Winnipeg, I said that this corresponded to a total water flow of something like 1,000 meters cubed per second. 1,000 meters cubed per second. Which means that if you divide this by 1,000 and this by 1,000, it means that a 50 square mile region collects 1 cubic meter per second of water based on a year-round average. Remember when I did that calculation, 1,000 meters cubed per second? That's basically equating 20 inches per year and trying to convert that to over 50,000 square miles, converting it into meters cubed per second. Anyways, this is what it came to, 1,000 meters cubed per second. The point is, 1 cubic meter per second is the rainfall on 50 square miles. So 3 cubic meters per second, which is what we use in Winnipeg, corresponds more actually quite approximately to the rainfall on 150 square miles, which is not far from the area of Winnipeg. And this topic, so actually the water we use, which we bring in through pipes, is roughly equal to the water which was already falling on us anyhow. Anyway, the point of this topic is I wanted to look at, and I don't know if we'll have time for it on today's show, but I wanted to look at the water situation in Israel. I mean, they have a very bad problem with water situation. Their whole source of water concentrates into the reservoir up north in the Sea of Galilee, which we call
Tiberias.
They call it the Sea of Tiberias. We call it Kinneret also.
Tiberias.
Lake Tiberias.
Yeah. And the Kinneret. Right.
That's the same basic lake, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And which.
But both Tiberias and Galilee sound sort of biblical. Oh no, Tiberias is the name of one of those Romans on I Claudius.
Yeah, that's
so maybe
right.
It's a
okay. So the Romans must have called it Tiberias.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyhow, it's they got a big problem with water consumption there, and what I wonder is what it would cost to actually desalinate seawater in terms of, since I know what we use in Winnipeg, like a cubic meter per day, half a cubic meter per person per day, what would it cost to desalinate that from the sea? And the figures are a little bit scary. Desalination is an expensive process. Now, the first thing you do will scare the heck out of you because it's real expensive if you do it the dumb way. And we'll show you how bad it is.
Boiling.
Right. Boiling the water. First thing you'd think of is to boil the water.
So you're starting with water at room temperature, and you're going to raise it to the boiling point. Then it takes a quarter of a joule to raise every milliliter a degree. So
4
you're
joules.
work that
You're
out.
going
4, yeah,
backwards.
I'm going
It's 4
wrong.
calories
Okay.
per joule, not 4 joules per calorie.
Okay.
Yeah, now
4
here's...
joules.
Everyone should know, by the way, the history of water. That it takes a certain amount of thermal energy to raise the temperature of water from absolute zero when it's ice to the melting point.
What's your vertical axis, Marty?
Now, okay, let's see what's my vertical axis is going to be
Energy?
temperature.
Temperature, oh yeah.
Temperature, and my horizontal axis is going to be energy. So you add energy to water and bring it to the melting point, and then you melt ice. And then while you're adding energy, the temperature doesn't rise. And during this time, you add a total of
80 calories per
80
gram?
calories per gram. I'm going to go kilocalories per kilogram, if that's okay. 80 kilocalories per kilogram. A kilogram is like a liter. And then once you get it melted, the temperature starts rising again. And actually, it doesn't rise as fast as it was before. In other words, while it was ice, it was quite easy to make the temperature rise. And then it was almost impossible to make the temperature rise, although you were adding energy while it was melting. But once it melts, the temperature will rise again, but only half as fast as it used to rise. And the slope at which it rises, which is the degree to which it rises, corresponds to 1 calorie per degree centigrade. And by the time you've added 100 degrees, which will take us up to about here, you reach the boiling point. So 80 calories melts it, another 100 calories brings you to the boiling point. And from here on in, the amount you need is just ridiculous.
To vaporize.
To vaporize, you need, and I don't have the scale to draw it correctly, but it should be 540 kilocalories. 540 kilocalories. So just to raise it from room temperature to the boiling point, you don't have to worry about that. This is what's going to kill you, the 540 kilocalories. And then once it boils, it's all been converted to vapor state, and once again the temperature will rise again. This is what you're facing in boiling water. Now 540 kilocalories is, you multiply by 4 to get it into kilojoules. So it's about 2,000 kilojoules to vaporize 1 kilogram of water, which is 1 liter of water. But we're not talking in liters, we're talking about meters cubed when you talk your daily requirements. So instead of 2,000 kilojoules, we got a...
500, eh? 500 times as much?
Oh no, 1,000 times as much. 1 kilogram is 1 liter.
Oh, but you don't want to use half a cubic meter. You only use a
Okay,
cubic
let's get a
meter.
meter, right. Yeah, that's right. 500 for what we need. But let's just...
I want to know how much I would have to pay out of my pocket
Exactly.
to desalinate water.
Exactly. But let's say first, let's get our cubic meter.
Okay.
1 meter cubed would be 2,000 megajoules. Megajoules. Now, if you remember several weeks ago, I discussed how much energy is available in a liter of gasoline. A liter of gasoline. And this is where it gets scary. 1 liter of gasoline is good for 40 megajoules. Holy smoke. It can't be this bad. So to come up with, it looks like I'm talking 50 liters of gasoline. To get 2,000 megajoules, yeah, if I multiply it by 50, that would be 2,000 megajoules. And you know what 50 liters of gas costs you?
That would be $25 for 2 people to drink water and flush the toilets.
25 bucks a day, that's pretty scary. 25 bucks a day. Maybe 10 bucks a day. I mean, if I think half the cost of gasoline is tax, so if the government is boiling it, I think like the industrial price of oil is is like 30 cents a liter. It's not all that much cheaper, 20, 30 cents a liter. You're still looking at a good 10 or 20 bucks per meter cubed to boil water. Pretty scary. But it turns out that there's certain considerations which enable you to do it more economically than this, at a certain cost of investment in equipment and technology. Maybe we'll have time to talk about that. We should probably do a song at this point in the show. Now, last show we were talking about the influences. I'll move over to the piano. We're talking about the influences of outside culture from the world at large on country music, and we did a song by Charles Aznavour, which became incorporated into the country western tradition when it was recorded by guitar virtuoso and host of Hee Haw, Roy Clark. Fantastic song, and Roy Clark does a beautiful version of it yesterday when I was young. And I mentioned that Aznavour is from Armenian background, and it is a source of great pride to the Armenian people that they have been able to sort of take part in the great country music tradition in the United States, like halfway around the world, in this way, through their own blood. And in a similar way, it's a huge source of pride to Jewish people everywhere to know that one of the great country and western ballads of all time, A Boy Named Sue, was written by one of our own landsmen, a fellow named Sheldon Silverstein, and sung by Johnny Cash. And let's do it. TV. Well, my daddy left home when I was 3. He didn't leave much for my mom and me, just pictures and dogs. But the meanest thing that he ever done was before he decided up and run, that no-good farmer went and named me Sue. Well, he must have thought it was quite a joke, and it got a lot of laughs from a lot of folk, and it seemed I had to fight my whole life through. Some gal would giggle and I'd get red, and some guy'd laugh and I'd bust his head. I'm telling you, life ain't easy for a boy named Sue. Well, I grew up quick and I grew up mean. My fists got tough and my wits got keen, and I moved from town to town to hide my shame. But I made me a vow to the moon and stars I'd search the honky-tonks and bars and kill the man that gave me that awful name. Yeah, it was Gatlinburg in mid-July, and I'd just hit town, my throat was dry, and I thought I'd stop and have myself a brew. And there in a bar in a street of mud, sitting at a table dealing studs, that's a mangy no-good dog that named me Sue. Well, I knew that snake was my own sweet dad from the worn-out picture my mama had, and I knew that scar in his cheek and his evil eye. He was big and bent and gray and old, and I looked at him, brother and cold, and I said, "My name is Sue. How do you do? Now you're gonna die." Well, I hit him hard right between the eyes, and he went down, but to my surprise, he come back with a knife and he cut off a piece of my ear. Then I busted a chair right over his teeth, and we crashed through the windows out in the street, kicking and gouging in the mud and the blood and the beer. Well, I'm telling you, I fought tougher men, but I really can't remember when. He kicked like a mule and he bit like a crocodile. Well, I heard him laughing and I heard him cuss, and he reached for his gun, but I got mine first, and then he dropped his gun, and then he smiled. He said, "Son, this world is rough, and if a man's gonna make it, he's gotta be tough," and I knew I wouldn't be there to help you along. So I give you that name, and I said goodbye. I knew you'd have to get tough and die, or it's that name that helped to make you strong. Yeah, well, I know you hate me, and you got the right to kill me now. You got the right, and I wouldn't blame you if you do. But you ought to thank me before I die for the gravels you got and the spit in your eye, 'cause I'm the loudest son that named you Sue. What could I do? Well, I got all choked up and I dropped my gun, and called me a pawn, he called me a son, and I come away with a different point of view. Well, I think about him now and then, every time I fight and every time I win. And if I ever have a boy, I think I'm going to name him Bill or George or anything but Sue. I still hate that man. Interesting thing about that song, on the record version, Johnny Cash's guitar players also miss a chorus, because like Johnny Cash actually sort of talks through talks through one of the courses and puts a few extra beats in. But actually, they catch up a little faster than Neil did. They did sort of click back in, but anyways, we got there. We don't always do that song. And there you go. It's about last minute of the show. And we said that, that if you look at the cost of boiling water, the energy cost of vaporizing a cubic meter of seawater to try and desalinate it, and then you have to recondense it, right? Now you're looking at 20 bucks a cubic meter, which is 10 bucks a day per person, which is an outrageous expense. Like for my family of 5, it would be 1,500 bucks a month, is it? 300 bucks a day? Yeah, it looks like 1,500 bucks a month. I mean, you couldn't do it. But there's some ways around it, and there's the minimum energy that it takes is actually surprisingly small. But to achieve that is almost impossible. But we're going to try and look at some future show at how close you can actually come to achieving this. And in the meantime, we just about had it for today. Those winds of change, they keep on rolling. Willie Nelson, every time I try to stay. Those winds of change, sing it, you know. Those winds of change can